I grew up like a savage.
1 2 1 2. You now rocking with the No Vultures podcast. You got me, myself, Lord Rab. You got OG Clee on a vacation. You got Corin the Barber on a vacation with his family. And today we have a very, very, very special guest. Now, you may have seen this guy on Vice. You may have seen him because you are a real culture head and you know about On the Go magazine, which he started with his partner Espo. You may know about him making his medallions back in the day in Philly. You may know him from just doing random art. You may have just learned about him on Instagram, but this guy is a true inspiration. This guy is very relevant to the culture. Somebody that we should give his flowers while he's here because he's had such an impact. We got Ari Saal Forman on No Vultures today.
Man, that was an amazing intro.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
I really appreciate that.
And I like to just give the No Vultures disclaimer and let you know that started a podcast. And to be honest with you, I don't have no problem giving people their props. I've been around plenty journalists, Sway's family. I've been around a lot of people who do journalism, and I never saw myself locking in to doing journalism until I saw Noriega's Drink Champs. So with DJ FN. And so the format in which I felt like I could actually do journalism and be myself and also my partners, that we could be ourselves and cover the culture for us by us, because I believe hip hop in itself is a entire subculture that just like it's a gumbo, so
yeah, it sure is.
And the way I grew up and looking at the way you grew up and the things that influenced you and what's in your mind, the things that stained your canvas coming up is the same things I relate to. And that's basically what this show is about. It's about the culture, so things that you stand for is protect the culture by any means. And that's what we're about.
I love it. So that's why I'm here. I get a lot of requests, and be honest with you, I would talk to everybody and anybody. There's a point where it becomes redundant, and
right.
You just you're getting asked the same questions, you're saying the same thing.
Right.
And when I looked at your podcast, when I looked at you guys, I was like, okay, here's potential for some real conversation that isn't, we're going to touch all the stuff, but there's some folks here that might understand me a little better.
Right, exactly. Well, first of all, I already noticed, I'm fortunate enough to notice that you was born in Oakland.
I was rather. Yeah. I'm a real California kid in that way. I was born in Oakland. However, I was not raised in Oakland. I don't really know much about it other than the pass through. But I know that it reflects a lot of what I've been through in the other cities in my life. So it's par for the course, as they say.
Yes.
And then, from there I went south.
Yeah. Well, it's something about, I know early on you had to have bathed and drank our water, so you got that in your blood.
I was born in Samuel Merritt, if that's still around.
That's crazy. Yeah, Merritt is still there. Yeah. It's called
man.
now, but it's the same thing. Yeah, it's still there.
It's probably got 2-3-star reviews. Nobody's happy with a hospital.
Yeah, nobody. No, not right now.
No, nobody.
So after you left Oakland, you guys went to LA.
That's right. Yeah.
And
go ahead.
So what time period in? I usually ask musicians, but also people that's embedded in the culture. Explain to me what it was like growing up in LA. What was the soundtrack to your life? What was you hearing? What was you seeing? As far as hip hop, we talk about the 5 elements, right? So just thinking about your upbringing and what you saw, what you felt, what was the vibe at that time in LA?
That's a really tough question. I've been asked that before. And you know, on the East Coast, everyone has always thought I was Puerto Rican. It's
Okay.
just always been this
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
And they didn't think I was Puerto Rican. They thought I was Italian. But you know, my family are a mixture of people. Like we have, you know, my siblings and I have different fathers, and my mother is from a Pennsylvania background. And so the soundtrack is really multifaceted because it was based on who was in my crib at the time.
Okay.
So my mom, who was this hippie, my father, who was this square. He's trying to be a hippie, but he's a straight square.
Okay.
My mom was fast from the street. So my father met my mother at a party. My mother was living in Philly in the projects with 3 kids. So when she met my father, she saw a way out. You know, he was a med student, and she was like, wait a minute, you know, I could ride this out.
Yeah.
And they linked up.
Right.
So, you know, went to Oakland. I was born, went to LA. So now you're talking about my siblings' influence, my mother's influence, my father's influence. And then our house was an open house in that there were runaways and addicts and, you know, just people that hung around. We took in every pet and every person. It was just, you know, it was one of them type of cribs. So the soundtrack, the music soundtrack is rock, soul, metal, punk, disco, and anything that was just coming through the airwaves. You know, this is the 70s, so we're spinning vinyl back then.
Right.
I didn't hear any hip hop going through the 70s at all. I'm sure it was there, but as we moved around, as my parents separated, a lot of bullshit happened, a lot of drugs were involved, but I ended up being homeless for years with my mother.
Okay.
And that created a different soundtrack. And that was sort of like wherever we were at, I would hear different things. So the soundtrack, it really, you know, to pull it all together is the soundtrack of the street. And the street is varied, you know, it's varied. At points I lived in Chicano neighborhoods, you know, and in parts of Hollywood where it was, you know, Clanton 14th Street and Rebels 13th Street. And that soundtrack was very different than what was even happening at the cribs that we were staying in. And so the woman, there's a couple of women that really looked out for me when I was younger, and they had different soundtracks. One was a white woman, another one was a black woman. My best friends were white and black, and they had different soundtracks. It was very, so it really, in a music sense, it laid the foundation of me never being one thing and being narrowed down to one point of thinking musically, creatively, and in terms of the people around me. There was no one anything.
Do you kind of like, because like when I think of that era, I mean, I think Jonah Hill did a movie like about the skate culture, and it was kind of like early on, like when I think of Beastie Boys, when I think of Run DMC, when I think of the Clash, and kind of like the mashup of like punk and hip hop, like it was like, in my mind, I'm envisioning like between like 82 and 85, before hip hop like veered straight off into its own thing, when it kind of, you know, what Run DMC, Kings of Rock, you know what I mean? And I think about those. I can remember going to not Rock the Bells. I can't remember which tour, Raising Hell tour, maybe. No, it wasn't Raising Hell yet, but when Beastie Boys first came on the scene, and their set was Coming Out of This Radio, right? And I was like, but they not dressed super fresh. Like, but that was the average urban white kid, right? So the white kid that was hood looked like they looked, right?
Yes.
Which is like kind of like the style now. Like that's like the look, right? So holes in the jeans, rock tees, you know, whatever, like kind of like what the style is now. That was their look. And it was kind of like they super unpolished as far as they look. Their music is excellent. But I looked at that shit like it was kind of like, it would be my first introduction into like rock, right? And then the way they meshed it up, it was like, it had no real genre. It was just a thing at the time.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're accurate about that. It was the convergence of cultures in many ways, you know,
Right.
that certain cities, you know, there's a line in the sand and there's racial tension on either side of that line. And in other cities, it just was more blurry, you know. I imagine New York was a far more integrated than, you know, Oakland, LA, Philadelphia, where I spent many years of my life. They were anywhere where there's two groups of people, there's some integration, but in general, it just wasn't. And like you said, come the mid 80s, it happened. Everything just sort of like came together. I came in LA from a skate culture.
Okay.
And that was just sort of by default, but it wasn't like skate culture that you envision now. Back then, it was a little more, it was like surfer culture away from the beach.
Right.
And that was just something I
those,
gravitated.
like those early brands like O'Neal and Stussy, like they catered to like surfing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stussy really came into their own in the 80s, and they were sort of the first brand to kind of represent street skate culture.
Mm-hmm.
And by default, really, there wasn't, for most of us, we didn't wear any of that stuff outright. We just had skate shirts. So if it was a brand we liked, Powell Peralta or Blockhead or whatever, you know, Alva back then, Dogtown, we would wear it. But, you know, Ocean Pacific, Hobie.
Yeah.
And those were pretty commercial brands. And then you have your local skate shops where you always try to rep those, you know.
Right.
But in LA, when I moved to Philly, it was in 82.
Okay.
I moved to Philly, which basically was my parents had separated years earlier. My father, to get away from the craze of LA, and I mean, let's be honest, the craze of my mother, he moved to Philly, where they had all met. My two brothers, my sister, my mother, my father, they all are from Philly. I was the only one who was born out west, born in Oakland.
Okay.
And so my father had left a year or two prior. A year or two prior to Philly. And when I got to Philly, I arrived with this kind of skate culture. I had lived off and on that whole year before in 82. So from like 81 to 82 in Mexican neighborhoods, in mixed neighborhoods.
Okay.
And so when I arrived, I had this whole kind of like, you know, classic plaid buttoned up to the neck,
right,
you know, lumberjack style, and not even on some hood shit or some gangbanger shit. It's just what even skaters were doing too. So you either had a t-shirt or you had your, you know, your button up and your bandana or whatever. And I when I arrived in Philly, my father had moved to an area called Germantown. We call G-Town.
Okay.
Which in Philly is, I guess geographically you would say northwest Philly, but it's G-Town is this area that's next to North Philly.
Okay.
And I arrived right into hip hop. It was a black neighborhood. There were no white people. It was me, my dad. We lived on this quiet little block that had like a field next to it and two old folks' homes and some kind of like landmark building. So it was a dead block. But 2 blocks up was the drug strip.
Okay.
And then 2 blocks this way was where you got into like some of the, you know, the row homes that were run down, the Section 8 buildings that were essentially projects.
Okay.
And so when I arrived, the minute I went outside my door, hip hop was there waiting for me. And it took on a whole different like angle from my, damn, saw that?
Yeah, I saw that.
Lightning strike and sent the electricity.
I saw that.
New York is crazy. Anyway, so here I am, this kind of skater, cholo-y street kid, and I arrive East Coast hip hop, Philadelphia, 2-hour drive to New York City. So New York and Philly share all this cultural commonality. And I was like, being a skater did not work in my hood. It was They were just like, surf's up, dude, cowabunga, or whatever crazy shit.
Right.
You know, in Philly slang, they'd be like, get your nut ass out of here.
Right.
White boy,
Right.
fuck out of here. You know, like chasing me and shit. And over a certain amount of months, I built friends up in the neighborhood, started going to put the skate shit aside. Still did it, but, you know, I couldn't play that role really.
Right.
At least dressing. And then I started to just take on what was that street look from there, which was hip hop, with crazy ass styles and bucket hats and, your jeans creased and starched to a permanent, the Niagara. And,
that shit was crazy. Now I noticed about you that you guys didn't have access to the African medallions like you wanted.
yeah, we did not. And as I got more into hip hop culture and then embraced my, like you said, in '85 and '86, I started to re-embrace the skate culture because there was that convergence.
Right.
In that same time period where I kind of had these different influences, and I was showing up to the skate spots in like some, my hood style matching shit, which was like color on color on color. So I had the chucks that were burgundy, the pants that were burgundy, and the shirt was burgundy.
Right.
Looking crazy. And the skater kids were all like rock t-shirt, and they were just looking at me like, what the fuck? So here it was again. I was being rejected. But at this point, I'm my own man. I'm like, fuck y'all. I'm gonna be what I'm gonna be.
Right.
And at that time, in those mid '80s, African medallions and like sort of like Zulu Nation medallions and different things were trickling down from New York. And I didn't know where the fuck to buy that. I didn't know what to do, and I wasn't gonna rock the Africa medallion and be posing out here. But I was like, look, I can make shit for my boys so they could rock Africa medallions. I could make letters for me because I had been writing graffiti for shit, almost 10 years at that point.
Okay.
And so I just started the shit I couldn't find. I would make belts, medallions, patches for hats. I would get generic hats or hats with logos, and I would cover them with patches. I was doing people's jackets with rhinestones and airbrushing. And
so you had the wherewithal to already know to go to like leather shops and to get these things, your materials. You just on the fly, you just did it.
It just made sense to me. My mom was a real arts and crafts type, and a lot of the things that my mom was into just didn't work for me, but that was the thing. She just was creative with me, and I was her her last child, and she was able to spend a good 4 or 5 years of my life just doing creative shit. So I always knew to go to the art store, or go to like an antique store, a craft store. So when it came time for that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I either knew from roaming the streets in Philly, and I think that's probably more likely, or I opened up the phone book and looked for, just leather, and there was this national chain called Tandy Leather.
Okay.
And you could go there and buy little scraps of leather and bags of scrap leather. And I went in there, and I went to another place and found cording and the leather glue, and I started making shit. It was
wow. That's amazing, man. That's fucking crazy. Like, and that's the thing that in the culture of hip hop, I think that being have-nots or not having a lot, you become more resourceful with the things that you do have access to, instead of being like, there's a total gap in between like what my kid is now and how I grew up. Like they don't even have they don't even have the capacity. Like they just can't do it, right? So I know that you start making the custom medallions and you start getting the attention of rappers and rap labels. So like were you responsible for any of those early ones, like maybe the Salt and Pepper one, or I know Boogie Down Productions had custom ones back then.
I didn't do any Boogie Down. I wish I had.
Okay.
I did some for Salt and Pepper, but I don't know that they ever wore them. At one point, I was doing work for Play, from Kid and Play.
Okay.
I was going from Philly on a bus up to New York. Then I would get off the bus and get on the train out to Queens. And then I'd get off in Queens and take another bus to Play's neighborhood.
Wow.
And Play would pick me up, and then we would go to his shop. And I only worked up there a handful of days. I think I was way out of my league, to be honest with you. But my ideation was there. And
so what were they exactly doing in Play's shop? What were they doing?
Well, in Philly, well, you know what? And your audience may or may not know this, depending on their age. But in black neighborhoods, there were multiple tailors. You know, black folk made their own clothing. You know, they just didn't. You weren't gonna go buy some fly shit at the regular white retail store.
Right.
They were getting everything made. And in my neighborhood, we had a guy called Joe Paul Murray,
Okay.
who made these crazy ass like tight jean, wide legs, like slacks almost, but out of denim, and they would have like color on the back, and they were high waisted, like on some pimp shit.
Well, Philly, is it the kind of pants Teddy Pendergrass used to wear?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, Philly International, you could look up a whole lot of people and see some tight ass jeans, high waisted.
It popped in my head as soon as you said it. I thought about Philly. I thought about Teddy.
Man, right where he crashed his car, that's where I grew up. About, I guess if you had to count it in blocks, it'd be about 8-10 blocks away.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah, where he, you know, that's real Philly history around my neighborhood that way. But so yeah, because the tailors were everywhere, there was sort of an idea of you just got shit made, right? So New York, of course, having the same thing, every neighborhood having its tailor, Dapper Dan being the guy that became the tailor of Harlem, the tailor of drug dealers. And in Philly, like everybody started, it's like if New York did something or Philly did something, they shared that culture. And everyone would claim it as their own. So people were just doing their own things. And when Dapper Dan started doing that, it started happening in Philly.
Okay.
And so for me, what Play was doing was it sort of evolved. At this point, this is like, if we jump that far ahead, this is 1990, 91 maybe, I think 90.
Okay.
And so just that gap of years between like 85, 86, and 90, which back then to me seemed like a lifetime, but those 4 short years, Dapper Dan's sort of like bootleg culture went everywhere.
Yeah.
And for Play started making, all Salt and Pepper's crazy jackets. And Play.
Uh-huh.
Foreplay was the name of his tailoring business.
Okay.
They were making that stuff.
Okay.
So that's what it looked like. There was this woman, I think her name was Shucky. I don't remember, Shucky or Shooky. I think it was Shucky. And she was like the main tailor. She was a designer and tailor, and she was making incredible stuff. And she had a team up there.
Salt and Pepper jackets that's in the Pusha videos, some of the most iconic pieces of clothing ever. Like when you look at those jackets, I was always mad because they was girl jackets. I mean, well, women wore them. They weren't girl jackets, but women wore them. I was like, I wanted one of them fucking jackets. And if you think about it, years later, Troop emulated that style.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people did. Every so many years, someone would jump in with that.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know. There was some other cat. Was it Crucial Conflict or Bone Thugs or some group had some like locally made leather joints that looked incredible with letters on the back. But let me see where. Oh, so in Philly, the way that ended up in Play's or being on Play's radar. Not that it lasted long, but the way that I ended up there was that I started doing, like you said, medallions and jackets and hats for local rappers, just people on the scene. Did it for some drug boys, some other cats in the hood. And then my boy brought me into Ruff House Records. And Ruff House Records was independent back then. Okay. They were with I think they were getting distribution through somebody like Enigma or something. It was basically nothing. And they were in the basement of a building on 4th Street next to a legendary studio, a studio that was owned by Joe the Butcher and his brother, I think. Okay. Another cat maybe. And they had done I think it was Aerosmith, production in there. And, it was kind of iconic. Philly's known for music. So it was a studio of studios. I think later on, Jazzy Jeff had a studio in that same space maybe. But so they took me down into this ratchet ass little office in the basement with sliding glass doors. Okay. And they were like, hey, you're making these medallions, and so could you make a couple for us in our art? They just, it was nothing. I was charging $20, $25.
Okay.
Didn't even pay for it. I was just happy to be on. and be able to get some money to buy more supplies. So I made
Right.
medallions, and I think somehow in that same process, I got to meet EST from 3 Times Dope.
Hey, look, one of my, hey, listen, hands down, I fucking love that shit, right? And
That's
I
my brother
always
right
wanted to know
Mhm.
what was the love triangle with EST, Michelle, and what's it? It wasn't Shan? No. Who am I thinking about? Philly rapper. 3 Times Dope had they had Funky
Oh,
Dividends,
with Cool C,
Glamorous Life.
Glamorous Life, Cool
That's the
C,
same chick on
Hilltop
the
Hustlers,
videos.
yeah.
That's the same chick on the video. That's what I try. I try to school young guys and rappers like this shit is nothing new, man. Like hip hop is deep. Like this shit is
Yeah.
really deep.
Man, EST is like a brother to me to this day.
Okay.
We text, we talk, we see each other when we can. He's a thoroughbred, as we say in Philly, and there's few more thorough dudes. And
Right.
you talk about a talented man with endless vernacular, style, and real as can be, still in the hood, you know, living like castle style. You know, this
Yeah.
dude's a king.
What was his moniker? The Magnificent One? Was that his? What he used to call himself?
Well, he's the greatest man alive, the
Greatest man
magnificent
alive.
one, you know.
Yeah.
EST.
Hey, I love that shit.
He and what was his Act Nicholas? He was the Act Nicholas one. That's
Act
right.
Nicholas one. Act Nicholas one.
Sorry, E. I can't believe I even forgot that for a second.
Yeah.
So I met EST from 3 Times Dope, and then he introduced me to Chuck Nice and Woody Wood and them, and I was, you know, making these medallions for them and patches for them and for E anyways, and stuff for Ruff House. And then Ruff House got a distribution deal with Sony because of Joe the Butcher and work that he had done. And when they did that, they signed a bunch of random artists, and they wanted me to design a new logo. So I designed what is now what became the iconic Ruff House Records logo of the 90s. It was, you know, it was my first sort of professional job. You know, the logo is rough around the edges, but it is what it is. I did what I could.
What did you use? Because, you know, like if, you know, somebody will get in your DM nowadays and be like, hey, I'm a designer. Hey, I do graphics. But younger artists have no idea like what that was like back in the days. I know even before Photoshop, you know, actually my first lessons even in Photoshop was later on in the 90s, but even the rendering process with that was just so crazy. Like you should take 2 days for some shit to come through, right? So
it was awful.
But so doing that in the 90s for Ruff House, we talking about what year? Like
1990.
1990. How did you
1991.
How did you go about designing that logo? Like what was the process?
I think, you know, I think I designed it on what I had access to. I didn't have a computer, and I was doing things by hand prior to that. And at this point, I had learned how to use a Mac on my own.
Okay.
And I was in art school. It was like a tech school, and they were just building a computer lab. And when they finished, I walked in there and I seen, I don't know who the person was, I don't remember, but they were sitting there manipulating letters on the computer. And prior to this, you know, a computer was a black screen with green type, you know, like programmer shit, like DOS, you know. And when I seen this, I was like, oh, I understand. And somebody was manipulating type, you know, taking letters and twisting them, and I was blown away. I was like, I got to learn that shit right there, and I hopped right on. And in that process of learning is when I got that job. And so I actually did that logo on a Macintosh SE30, which was this little gray black and white screen this big, like literally this big, a little floppy drive.
Right.
And it was just slow and buggy. So any of the colors I had to make up.
Okay.
And I didn't know what it was going to be because it was black and white. And there was one computer that was a little better and had a color monitor, but I generally couldn't use that or couldn't get to that. I had to go to Kinko's which was like the copy shop.
Okay.
And I did it in this program called Type Styler, which was just this horrible program.
Okay.
It was so bad, but it was, I could bend it and do it. And I did that in there. And then immediately after, they had me do the logos for Kris Kross's merchandise. If you know Kris Kross, you know,
Okay.
Jump.
Yeah.
And so they had gotten a logo from the record label up in New York, Sony, and then they had all these other uses, and that just worked for the record, but it didn't work for their merch and all their personal stuff. So I ended up designing a bunch of things for Michael Malden.
Was the Kris Kross logo
father.
Was the Kris Kross logo the 2 Ks in the
Kris Kross
going? Yeah.
That's what it came from the record label. But the problem was, it was just too dainty. It was too soft. It didn't really do much. And so they needed some things with some heaviness to them. And so I did, I don't know, I must have done like 30, 40 logos, you know, twisting things, doing things, adding textures. And they chose one that was pretty straightforward. It had the Ks, it had but Kris Kross front and backwards, so to speak.
The black,
like
the black and white, right?
Yeah. This is unorthodox, but I'll get up and grab something for you.
No, that's what we do on No Vultures. We do unorthodox.
Okay, good then. And I got all kinds of props to pull in, man.
Yeah. Okay.
But this was this is the record label logo.
Okay. Okay.
You know, this one. And so this, you know, they used for everything throughout that decade, throughout the 90s for the most part.
All right.
I did a couple others, but they were only used in some other capacities. And then this is dusty, but this is a Kris Kross logo.
I remember that. Damn, but that's fly as hell though, right there.
Thanks, man. The Ks that came down from New York was like a skinny, it was one line. Let me think. It would be like if you had this and it was just a K here and a K there, and they shared the backbone.
Right.
And that I tried to work with that for them in a beefier sense, and it just didn't work. So I then abandoned, you know, Sony's idea and just went into things that were way more graphic. And so even when I did Ks, I had them, you know, separated in the middle there.
In the middle, yeah. That's fly right there.